The first-class cabin of Aura Airlines Flight 815 was a sterile cocoon, a hushed world of brushed aluminum cream leather, and the incessant hypnotic drone of engines pushing against the stratosphere. It was a space designed for disconnection where the world's most successful people paid a premium to be isolated from the planet they were soaring over at 600 miles per hour. For most, it was a sanctuary of legroom and complimentary champagne. For the woman in seat 2A, it was a hunting ground. Elena Vance did not look like a hunter. She looked like an academic, or perhaps a mid-level executive preparing for a conference. Her attire was deliberately forgettable, a simple but well-cut charcoal blazer, a silk shell in a muted teal, and dark trousers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, efficient chignon, and her face, devoid of all but the most subtle makeup, was a mask of placid concentration. Yet behind her calm gray eyes, a mind of formidable power was moving with relentless precision, cataloging every detail of her surroundings. She noted the faint scent of anxiety wafting from the businessman in 3C, who was trying to hide a spreadsheet of declining quarterly profits from his seatmate. She registered the almost imperceptible tremor in the hand of the young flight attendant Jessica Evans as she poured a glass of orange juice, a sign of inexperience and nerves. And she was acutely, intensely aware of the senior flight attendant, Brenda Walsh. Brenda moved through the cabin not like a hostess, but like a proprietor. 20 years with Aura Airlines had burnished her movements to a high, hard gloss. Her uniform was impeccable, her smile a perfectly calibrated instrument that could offer warmth or wield condescension with equal ease. To the untrained eye, she was the epitome of professional service. But Elena saw the truth in the minute details, the way her eyes lingered a fraction of a second too long on a passenger's expensive watch, the subtle shift in her posture that conveyed deference to old money and disdain for the new, the predatory stillness she possessed when she thought no one was watching. Brenda was a gatekeeper, and she was assessing every soul who entered her domain. When her gaze fell upon Elena, it faltered. Elena did not fit the established archetypes. She wasn't dripping with jewelry or loudly dictating orders into a phone. She was quiet. She had politely declined the pre-flight champagne, asking only for still water. And now she was poring over a sheaf of documents, her pen a fine-tipped lamy, making small cryptic notations in the margins. The papers were dense with text and complex diagrams, nothing like a novel or a business proposal. They looked like research. This quiet intensity, this aura of purpose, unsettled Brenda on a primal level. It was an anomaly, and Brenda Walsh's carefully controlled world had no room for anomalies. Inside Brenda's mind, a separate ledger was always running. It tracked more than drink orders and meal preferences. It was a complex calculus of risk and reward, a mental map of the illicit network she helped manage. This flight, a direct route from JFK to LAX, was a crucial artery for their operation. A specific piece of high-value undeclared cargo was nestled securely in a specialized compartment in the cargo hold destined for a discreet buyer in Beverly Hills. The system was flawless, built on years of routine and the calculated invisibility of the airline's own staff. A passenger like the woman in 2A, who observed everything and projected nothing, was a potential disruption. A loose thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. "Can I get you anything else before we begin our ascent, ma'am?" Brenda's voice was a purr of polished professionalism, but Elena heard the sharp edge of inquiry beneath it. Elena looked up, her eyes meeting Brenda's for the first time. They were clear, direct, and unnervingly perceptive. "No, thank you. I'm quite comfortable." She offered a small, polite smile that did not invite further conversation, and returned her attention to her papers. The dismissal, though courteous, was absolute. It pricked at Brenda's sense of authority. She moved away, the smile tightening on her lips. The woman was a problem. She felt it in her bones, the same instinct that told her when a customs officer was paying too much attention or when a piece of cargo was improperly logged. A plan, nebulous at first, began to form in her mind. A small act of assertion, a reminder of who was in charge of this metal tube hurtling through the sky. The plane climbed a graceful, powerful ascent that pressed the passengers gently back into their seats. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a long-haul flight. Elena continued her work, seemingly oblivious to the world around her. The documents were, as Brenda suspected, a crucial part of her investigation. They were printouts of encrypted communications, logistical charts, and financial transfers she and her team had intercepted over the last 3 months, all pointing to a sophisticated smuggling ring operating within Aura Airlines. The papers were a decoy, a duplicate set. The original evidence was on a micro SD card safely and invisibly sewn into the lining of her blazer. Her purpose in studying them so openly was twofold: to refresh her memory on the intricate details of the operation, and to see who might react to their presence. Brenda's reaction had been more immediate and more pronounced than she could have hoped for. An hour into the flight, during the main meal service, Brenda saw her opportunity. She was serving the main course, a pan-seared salmon with asparagus. For the other passengers, her movements were fluid and graceful. But as she approached seat 2A, she loaded a glass with a deep blood-red Cabernet Sauvignon. "Your salmon, ma'am," Brenda said, her voice smooth. She placed the plate on Elena's tray table. "I didn't order any wine," Elena stated, not looking up from a particularly dense page of schematics. "It's a complimentary pairing from the airline. For our most valued guests," Brenda insisted, her smile now having a predatory glint. She held the glass aloft. Just then, the aircraft experienced a minor, almost trivial shudder. It was the faintest touch of turbulence, the kind a seasoned flyer would barely register. For Brenda, it was the perfect cover. In a single fluid motion that was a masterpiece of feigned clumsiness, her wrist tilted at an impossible angle. The red wine did not simply spill. It seemed to leap from the glass, a perfect dark arc of liquid that descended directly onto the center of Elena's documents. The stain bloomed instantly, a deep spreading wound of crimson on the cream-colored paper. The complex diagrams and lines of text blurred into an indecipherable, soggy mess. "Oh my heavens," Brenda's voice was a symphony of manufactured shock. "I am so terribly, terribly sorry. That turbulence, it came out of nowhere. It completely threw me off balance." Several passengers looked up, startled by the outburst. Jessica, the junior flight attendant, watched from the galley, her face pale. She had felt the turbulence. It had been nothing, a mere whisper of movement. It could not have caused a spill like that. She had seen the deliberate, almost imperceptible angle of Brenda's wrist. Brenda grabbed a cloth napkin and began dabbing uselessly at the ruined papers, making the mess worse. "Let me help you clean this up." "Oh, your work. It's completely ruined. I feel just awful." But Elena Vance did not move. She did not gasp. She did not cry out in frustration. She simply sat there for a long, silent moment, watching the wine soak deeper into the fibers of the paper. Then slowly, she lifted her head. She did not look at the ruined documents. She did not look at the stain spreading onto the sleeve of her blazer. She looked directly and only at Brenda Walsh. What Brenda saw in Elena's eyes stopped the flow of her fake apologies mid-sentence. There was no anger. There was no panic. There was only a profound and terrifying stillness. It was the calm of a frozen lake hiding unfathomable depths. It was a look of pure, unadulterated analysis. In that moment, Brenda felt like an insect pinned to a board, every part of her being, examined, categorized, and understood by a superior intelligence. Elena's eyes seemed to strip away the uniform, the practiced smile, the 20 years of carefully constructed authority, and see the panicked, guilty woman cowering beneath. Elena's voice, when it came, was unnervingly quiet, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the cabin's hum like a shard of ice. The turbulence, she said, her gaze unwavering. How unfortunate. She picked up one of the soaked pages, holding it between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were a piece of contaminated evidence. She glanced at it, then back at Brenda. A flicker of something that might have been amusement or perhaps pity crossed her face. "It seems," Elena continued, her voice still dangerously soft, "you've made quite a mess." Brenda stood frozen, the empty wineglass still in her hand. The script of the confrontation she had initiated had been thrown out. She had expected shouting complaints, a demand to speak to the captain, a scenario where she, with her senior status and procedural knowledge, would hold all the cards. She had not expected this. This quiet, piercing judgment. This absolute control. The hunter had just realized she had stumbled into the cage of a far more patient and lethal predator. She stammered a final, weak apology and retreated to the galley, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know who the woman in 2A was, but she knew one thing with sickening certainty: she had just made the biggest mistake of her long and duplicitous career. The descent into Los Angeles was a slow, surreal glide through a haze of amber light. Inside the first-class cabin of Flight 815, the atmosphere had congealed into a thick, uncomfortable silence. The casual camaraderie of the elite had evaporated, replaced by the awkward tension of witnesses to a crime they wished to forget. Passengers who had earlier exchanged pleasantries now studiously avoided eye contact, retreating into their noise-canceling headphones and in-flight movies. They had seen the quiet power shift the senior flight attendant's public dismantling, and now, like courtiers after a palace coup, they were unsure of the new rules of engagement. Brenda Walsh had made herself scarce. After her humiliating retreat, she had remained in the rear galley, leaving the more junior Jessica Evans to handle the final cabin preparations. From her seat, Elena could occasionally see Brenda's reflection in the polished chrome of the galley equipment, a tense, rigid figure moving with jerky, unnatural motions. The Queen had been checked, and she did not know how to process it. Her authority, the very air she breathed for 2 decades, had turned to poison in her lungs. Elena, in stark contrast, was an island of tranquility. She had calmly gathered the wine-soaked documents, blotting them carefully with a napkin before placing them back into her leather portfolio. To any observer, she looked like a professional who had suffered an annoying but manageable setback. She showed no anger, no lingering distress. This unnerving composure was in itself a statement of power that resonated more deeply than any outburst could have. It was the calm of someone who operated on a different plane, someone for whom this incident was not a conclusion, but merely a data point. As the plane taxied to the gate, Elena unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her movements fluid and unhurried. She collected her carry-on from the overhead bin. As the other passengers shuffled impatiently in the aisle, she paused beside Jessica, who was standing nervously by the forward galley, avoiding Brenda's dark glare from the back. Jessica Elena said, her voice low and warm, yet carrying an unmistakable resonance. Jessica flinched, her eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your professionalism during the flight. It was noted and appreciated." Elena's gaze was direct and held a world of unspoken meaning. It said, "I saw you. I saw your discomfort, your integrity. You are not invisible to me." A flicker of understanding and perhaps gratitude passed through Jessica's eyes before she quickly looked away, murmuring, "You're welcome, ma'am." Elena gave a slight nod and proceeded down the jet bridge, leaving behind a cabin thick with unspoken questions. She walked past the hurried greetings of the ground staff, her focus singular. She bypassed the baggage claim and the waiting town cars, heading directly for the Aura Airlines first-class international lounge. The lounge was an oasis of corporate branding, a symphony in silver and navy blue. Sleek, minimalist furniture was artfully arranged on a plush carpet that swallowed the sound of footsteps. The air was scented with a custom blend of white tea and citrus, a fragrance designed to soothe the frayed nerves of the global elite. Behind a sweeping marble desk stood an agent, a young man named Mark, whose smile was as polished and superficial as the countertop he presided over. "Welcome to Los Angeles. How may I assist you?" He chimed, his customer service voice perfectly modulated. "I need to file a formal incident report regarding a crew member on Flight 815. Elena stated, her tone calm and factual. She placed her portfolio on the marble desk and opened it to reveal the stiff, warped pages still smelling faintly of fermented grapes. Mark's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. This was not the usual request for a missed connection or a lost amenity kit. "Of course, ma'am. I'm very sorry to see this. Could you please provide the details?" Elena recounted the event with the dispassionate precision of a court reporter. She described Brenda's demeanor, the lack of significant turbulence, and the deliberate angle of the spill. She did not use accusatory words like assault or malice. She simply presented the facts, a sequence of observable events that led to an irrefutable conclusion. "I am requesting a full investigation into the conduct of the senior flight attendant, Ms. Brenda Walsh. I would also like a copy of the report that she, as the purser, is required to file regarding any spillage or passenger complaint." "I understand completely," Mark said, his fingers tapping rapidly on his keyboard. "Let me just pull up the flight log. One moment." He stared at his screen, and Elena watched as a subtle but definite change came over his posture. His shoulders tightened. The practiced smile was replaced by a neutral, guarded mask. He had found Brenda's report. From Mark's perspective, the situation had just flipped. The internal report, logged less than 30 minutes ago from a crew terminal, was concise. It noted a minor spill in Seat 2A caused by unexpected turbulence. It described the passenger as being understandably upset but verbally confrontational, and that senior flight attendant Walsh had apologized profusely and de-escalated the situation according to standard procedure. The unwritten rule of airline customer service was clear in a conflict between a passenger and a senior crew member with a 2-decade-long unblemished record. The crew member's account was the bedrock of fact upon which all else was built. The passenger was emotion. The crew was procedure. Ma'am, Mark began, his tone having shifted from helpful to placating. I see that our senior flight attendant has already logged the incident. She notes that it was an unfortunate accident and that she offered her sincerest apologies. She also mentioned that you seemed quite distressed. I was not distressed. I was targeted, Elena corrected him, her voice losing none of its calm but gaining a chilling edge of steel. And her report, as you've described it, is a fabrication. Mark's training kicked in. His job was not to determine the truth. It was to resolve the conflict and protect the brand. Well, for the damage to your documents and for the unpleasantness of the experience, I am authorized to offer you a $500 travel credit as a gesture of goodwill from the airline. He said it with an air of finality, as if bestowing a great and generous gift. Elena looked at him, her expression one of profound disappointment. Mark, she said, using his name for the first time, I am not a problem to be managed with a voucher. I am a passenger who is reporting a deliberate act of aggression from a member of your staff. This is not a customer service issue. It is a safety and conduct issue. Now I would like to speak with your supervisor. The supervisor, a woman named Carol Jenkins, who arrived a few minutes later, was the next level of the corporate fortress. Her suit was sharper. Her smile more practiced her language, an impenetrable wall of empathetic-sounding jargon. She listened patiently to Elena's account, nodding in all the right places. I can certainly understand your perception of the event, Ms. Vance, Carol said, her voice smooth as butter. However, Brenda Walsh is one of our most decorated flight attendants. In 20 years, she has never had a single official complaint filed against her. She has a spotless record. Then perhaps it's time her record reflected reality, Elena countered. A long career does not grant immunity from accountability. Of course not, Carol agreed smoothly. And I assure you, we take all passenger feedback very seriously. I will personally forward your report to our internal review board, and they will look into it. The condescension was subtle but immense. The phrase, look into it, was a corporate euphemism for a black hole, a place where inconvenient complaints went to die. They were not investigating. They were containing. I see, Elena said. She stood up, collecting her portfolio. The wine-stained papers felt like a symbol of the entire encounter, a clear and obvious transgression that the system was determined to reframe as a meaningless stain. Thank you for your time. She walked out of the lounge, leaving Carol and Mark to exchange a look of mutual relief. The problem had been managed. The passenger, though persistent, was gone. They had followed procedure. They had protected their own. As Elena Vance stepped out into the chaotic, sun-blasted arrivals level of LAX, she was not filled with the impotent rage of a wronged customer. Her frustration was cold, intellectual, and profoundly clarifying. She had just tested the walls of the fortress and found them exactly as she'd expected. Thick, self-repairing, and utterly indifferent to the truth. They had dismissed her, patronized her, and tried to buy her silence. They thought they were dealing with a disgruntled passenger. They had no idea they had just confirmed the rot within to the one person who could burn the entire structure to the ground. She pulled out her smartphone and navigated to an encrypted messaging app. She selected a single contact, a name composed only of a string of numbers. She typed a short message. Probe successful. Nest confirmed hostile. System is compromised. Initiating phase 2. She pressed send. A moment later, a single reply appeared. Acknowledged. Awaiting instructions. Elena looked up from her phone, her gaze sweeping over the bustling terminal. The expression on her face was no longer that of a victim or a writer. It was the focused, implacable look of a hunter who had just watched her prey walk directly into the snare. The airline's wall of indifference had not been an obstacle. It was confirmation, and the real investigation had just begun. Elena Vance operated out of a suite at the Viceroy L'Ermitage in Beverly Hills, a location chosen for its impeccable discretion and its distance from the transient, gossipy world of airport hotels. The suite was not a place of luxury for her, but a sterile, temporary command center. The plush sofas were covered in files, the coffee table held a satellite phone and 2 encrypted laptops, and the art on the walls was ignored in favor of a large whiteboard she had requested, which was already filling with a spiderweb of names and flight routes. Within an hour of leaving LAX, she was on a secure video call with Silas, the digital ghost who served as her entire technical division. Silas existed only as a disembodied voice and a string of code. He had no face, no last name, and a level of access to the world's digital infrastructure that would have terrified governments if they knew he existed. The manifest for Flight 815 is on your server. His synthesized voice announced devoid of inflection. I've cross-referenced it with employee files. The junior attendant is Jessica Evans, age 24, hired 8 months ago, based out of Denver. Background, Elena asked, her eyes scanning the data as it materialized on her screen. Clean, Silas replied. Working-class family from rural Oregon. First in her family to move away from home. Student loans. She sends $200 home every week to help with her younger sister's community college tuition. This job is not a whim for her, Elena. It's a lifeline. The information settled heavily in Elena's mind. It confirmed her read on the young woman's nervous energy and raised the stakes of what she was about to ask. Jessica Evans was not a casual thrill-seeker or a disgruntled employee looking for a fight. She was a responsible young woman trapped in a precarious financial situation, making her exactly the kind of person a predator like Brenda Walsh could easily intimidate and control. It also meant that if Jessica chose to help, it would be an act of genuine costly courage. She has a 28-hour layover in Los Angeles, staying at the airport Marriott room 714. Her return flight to Denver is tomorrow at 4 p.m., Silas reported. Thank you, Silas. Maintain surveillance on Walsh's internal communications. I'm looking for any mention of the incident or any unusual contact with her network. Already done, the voice replied, and the screen went blank. Elena knew that a direct approach, a phone call, or a knock on Jessica's hotel room door would be a disastrous mistake. It would be an act of aggression, placing the young woman on the defensive and immediately triggering her flight response. She needed to create an encounter that felt like chance, a meeting in a neutral space where Jessica felt a semblance of control. The following morning, Elena sat in the Marriott's bustling lobby cafe, a place of transient energy where hundreds of brief anonymous encounters occurred every hour. She nursed a cup of black coffee, reading a physical copy of the Wall Street Journal, an analog prop in a digital world. She had already mapped Jessica's likely routine. A young flight attendant on a layover far from home and on a tight budget would likely come down for the complimentary breakfast. At 8:15 a.m., Jessica appeared. She looked tired, her uniform from the previous day replaced with simple jeans and a hoodie. She moved with an air of distraction, her eyes scanning the room nervously, as if expecting to see a familiar, threatening face. She collected a coffee and a muffin and was heading towards a small, empty table when Elena stood up as if to leave, engineering a path that would lead them to a gentle, unavoidable collision. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice soft as their shoulders brushed. Jessica looked up and for a moment saw only a stranger. Then recognition dawned and a wave of panic washed over her face. Her eyes widened and she took an involuntary step back, nearly spilling her coffee. It was the woman from 2A. "I'm so sorry to startle you," Elena said, her expression one of polite concern. "I'm Elena Vance. We were on the same flight from New York yesterday." I remember, Jessica stammered, her gaze darting around the crowded cafe. She was terrified of being seen, of this conversation being reported back to Brenda. "I have to go." She tried to sidestep Elena, but Elena held her position, not blocking her path aggressively, but simply existing in it. "I just wanted to say again how much I admired your composure yesterday. It was a difficult situation, and you handled it with grace." The compliment was unexpected. It disarmed Jessica slightly. "Thank you," she mumbled, still trying to edge away. "I know what you saw, Jessica," Elena said, her voice dropping lower, creating a small private bubble of sound around them. "And I know you're in a very difficult position." She reached into her blazer pocket and discreetly held out a small folded piece of paper. "I believe good people shouldn't be forced to carry the weight of other people's secrets. If you ever feel the same, maybe we could have a real conversation." She pressed the note into Jessica's hand, her fingers brushing against the younger woman's for a brief, reassuring moment. Then, without another word, Elena turned and walked away, melting into the lobby's transient crowd. Jessica stood frozen for a full minute, her heart pounding. The folded note in her palm felt as heavy and dangerous as a live grenade. Her first instinct was to throw it away to pretend this encounter never happened. But Elena's words echoed in her mind. "I know what you saw." For the rest of the day, Jessica was a prisoner in her own hotel room. She replayed the incident on the plane. Brenda's smug cruelty, the shocking splash of red wine, and the quiet, unshakable dignity of the woman in 2A. She thought about her job, about the loans, about her sister. Losing this job would be catastrophic. But she also thought about the look in Brenda's eyes, a look that said she owned the world and everyone in it. Jessica had seen that look before in managers and teachers who abused their power, and she had always stayed silent. At 2 p.m., 2 hours before her flight, she unfolded the note. It contained an address for a small independent bookstore in Venice Beach and a time. 3 p.m., in the poetry section. My treat for coffee. The decision she made was the most terrifying of her young life. The bookstore was quiet, smelling of old paper and sea salt. Jessica found Elena in the designated section browsing a collection of Mary Oliver poems. She looked even less threatening here than she had in the hotel lobby. "I'm glad you came," Elena said, simply closing the book. They walked to the small cafe at the back of the store and sat at a secluded table overlooking a small private garden. For the first few minutes, Elena didn't ask about the flight. She asked about Jessica. Where was she from? What made her want to become a flight attendant? She listened with a genuine, undivided attention that Jessica had rarely experienced from anyone in a position of authority. She was creating a space of trust, not an interrogation room. "I know you're scared," Elena said finally, her voice gentle. "You have every right to be. Brenda Walsh is a bully, and she has the system on her side. If you speak out officially, she will find a way to destroy your career." Jessica nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "She told me after you deplaned that if I ever said a word, she'd make sure I was not only fired, but blacklisted. She said she has friends at every airline." "I believe her," Elena said, "which is why going through official channels is a fool's errand. I tried that yesterday. They offered me a voucher and showed me the door." "Then what's the point?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with despair. "We can't win." "We can," Elena said, and the emphasis on the word was profound. "Jessica, what you saw was not just a flight attendant having a bad day. It was a symptom of a sickness within that airline. Brenda felt comfortable doing what she did because she believes she is untouchable. People who believe they are untouchable are usually involved in things far worse than spilling wine on a passenger." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am not just another passenger. I am in a unique position to hold Aura Airlines and Brenda Walsh accountable. But to do that effectively, I need to understand the full scope of the problem. I need the truth from someone on the inside. Someone with integrity." She was offering Jessica a different narrative. She wasn't asking her to be a snitch. She was inviting her to be a partner in a crusade for justice. "But my family?" Jessica whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I can't lose this job." "You won't," Elena promised, and her confidence was absolute, backed by resources Jessica couldn't begin to imagine. "Your name will never appear in any report. Any information you provide will be filtered through my channels and will appear to come from anonymous digital sources. Brenda will never know it was you. When this is over, she will be gone, and the culture that protects people like her will be exposed and weakened. In the long run, the airline will be a safer place for people like you to work." Jessica looked at the woman across from her. Elena Vance was not what she seemed. There was a depth and a power to her that had nothing to do with a first-class ticket. She was offering a dangerous path, but it was also the only path that felt right. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time it was joined by a flicker of something else, hope. She took a deep, shaky breath, the kind you take before diving into cold, deep water. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "What do you need me to do?" A slow, genuine smile touched Elena's lips. It transformed her face, warming her serious features. "For now," she said, "just do your job. Watch. Listen. Keep a private journal. Note down anything that seems unusual. Conversations you overhear, irregularities in cargo manifests, last-minute crew changes on specific routes. Anything that feels wrong to you. We are not looking for a single piece of evidence just yet. We are mapping the nest." Elena slid a small, discreet object across the table. It looked like a simple USB power adapter. This is a secure communication device. Plug it into your laptop. It will open a protected channel directly to me. Use it to send your notes. Never use your phone or public Wi-Fi. The meeting was over. Elena paid for the coffees and walked out of the bookstore without a backward glance. Jessica remained at the table for a long time, the small device clutched in her hand. It felt impossibly heavy. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was an ally, a source, an operative in a secret war she barely understood. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a terrifying, thrilling sense of purpose. She had made her choice. She would no longer be silent. The world at 35,000 feet, once a backdrop of predictable routine for Jessica Evans, had become a landscape of hidden meanings. Every glance, every hushed conversation, every out-of-place object was now a potential clue in a conspiracy she was still struggling to comprehend. A week after her clandestine meeting with Elena Vance, Jessica found herself on the crew roster for a 3-day trip with Brenda Walsh, a pairing that in the past would have been a source of mild professional anxiety, but now felt like stepping into a cage with a sleeping tiger. Her hands trembled slightly as she performed the pre-flight safety checks on the Denver to Miami route. She focused on the familiar mechanics, testing the oxygen masks, checking the seals on the emergency exits, using the rote tasks to steady her nerves. She had to be flawless. She had to be invisible. Any deviation from her normal, slightly nervous but eager to please demeanor could alert Brenda that something had changed. Brenda, for her part, seemed to have fully recovered her imperious equilibrium. The incident with Elena Vance had been absorbed into her personal history and reframed as a victory. She had in her mind successfully neutralized a difficult passenger and had her version of events validated by the company. She moved through the cabin with her signature air of untouchable authority, her rebukes to the junior staff sharp and precise. Her smiles to the first-class passengers perfectly saccharine, yet Jessica, now viewing her through a new lens, could see the hairline cracks in the facade. Brenda's eyes scanned the cabin with a new restless energy. She was more vigilant, her posture a little more rigid. The encounter with Elena had left a scar of paranoia, a subtle but persistent hum of fear beneath the surface of her confidence. The flight was uneventful for the first 3 hours. Jessica performed her duties with painstaking care, her interactions with Brenda brief and deferential. She avoided Brenda's gaze, focusing on the passengers, on the neat rows of liquor bottles in the galley, on anything but the woman who now represented a mortal threat. The first clue emerged during a lull over the plains of Kansas. Jessica was in the forward galley, quietly restocking the snack basket. Brenda, believing herself to be alone, picked up the crew's satellite phone. Her back was to Jessica, but her voice, though low, carried in the tight, sound-reflective space. "Yes, it's me," Brenda said, her tone clipped and all business. "The delivery is on schedule." A pause. "The vintage is the 05 Bordeaux, confirmed on board and in perfect condition." Another pause, and then a strange non-sequitur of a statement. "The climate control in the cabin is holding steady at 72 degrees. We're expecting a very smooth decanting process upon arrival." Jessica's hands stilled over a bag of pretzels. Her blood ran cold. The words were a discordant mess. There was no 05 Bordeaux on the manifest. The finest red they were serving was a mediocre Californian Merlot. And cabin temperature was a trivial detail to relay with such gravity. Vintage, climate control, decanting. It was a code. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. This was what Elena had been talking about. This was the sickness. Feigning a search for napkins in a lower cabinet, Jessica remained crouched and out of sight, her mind racing to memorize the exact words. Brenda finished the call with a curt, "Understood," out, and hung up. When she turned, her eyes narrowed slightly as she saw Jessica rising from the cabinet. "Looking for something?" Brenda asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Just the extra cocktail napkins, Brenda. We were running low," Jessica replied, her own voice remarkably steady. She held up a small stack as proof. Brenda stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit. Finally, she gave a curt nod and moved into the main cabin. Jessica leaned against the counter, her legs feeling weak. Later, during her designated break, she locked herself in the lavatory. With trembling hands, she pulled a small spiral-bound notebook and a pen from her apron pocket. Under the harsh fluorescent light, she meticulously wrote down the date, the flight number, and Brenda's exact bizarre phrasing. The words looked even more incriminating on the page. Upon their arrival in Miami, the second piece of the puzzle fell into place. As the last passenger deplaned, the crew began their post-flight checks. Normally, as the senior attendant, Brenda would be the first to leave, eager to get to the layover hotel. But tonight, she lingered, citing a need to double-check the galley inventory. She instructed Jessica and the other junior attendant to head to the crew shuttle without her. "I'll catch the next one. Don't wait up." Jessica's instincts, now honed by a new sense of purpose, screamed that this was a lie. She boarded the shuttle but positioned herself in a seat with a clear view of the tarmac and the aircraft's cargo bay doors. The shuttle idled for 10 minutes, waiting for a final crew member from another flight. And in that window of time, Jessica saw it all. Brenda emerged from the jet bridge, not heading for the terminal, but walking briskly toward the active area around the plane. She made no attempt to hide, but her movements were furtive. She stood near the cargo bay, arms crossed, as the baggage handlers worked. Then Jessica saw the signal, a subtle, almost imperceptible touch to her own left earlobe. Across the tarmac, one baggage handler, a burly man whose name tag Jessica couldn't read from this distance, looked up and gave a slight nod. He then moved to the conveyor belt, but instead of loading one of the standard suitcases, he intercepted a specific, nondescript hardshell case in a dark graphite color. It had no airline tags, no identifying marks. With a practiced efficiency that spoke of long routine, he pulled the case off the belt and carried it not to the baggage cart, but to the edge of the active zone, where a black, unmarked utility van was waiting, its side door sliding open as he approached. The case was placed inside the door, slid shut, and the van drove away, melting into the airport's labyrinth of service roads. Brenda watched it go, then turned and walked calmly toward the terminal, her work done. The entire transaction had taken less than 90 seconds. It was a clean, silent, and utterly illegal breach of every security and baggage handling protocol in the book. That night, in the anonymous quiet of her Miami hotel room, Jessica felt a fear more profound than any she had experienced before. This was not about workplace bullying anymore. This was a real, dangerous criminal conspiracy. She double-checked the lock on her door, drew the blackout curtains, and pulled out the USB adapter Elena had given her. Her hands shook as she plugged it into her laptop. The device was a marvel of simplicity. No software to install, no complicated interface. A single plain text window opened on her screen, its stark white background and blinking cursor a gateway to a world she was not supposed to be a part of. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she poured out every detail of the day. Flight 305 Den Maye. BW on sat phone, approx 11:40 a.m. MT. Used coded language. Mentioned Aero 5 Bordeaux vintage, climate control, and decanting process. On arrival at MIA, she signaled a baggage handler. Saw him pull a graphite hardshell suitcase, no tags, from cargo. Placed in an unmarked black van, license plate G4B8Y2. Van left via service road. She recounted the events with the factual clarity Elena had used when filing her own report, trying to keep her own fear out of the words. When she was done, she stared at the block of text. It looked like something from a spy movie. She took a deep breath and hit the send key. The text vanished from the screen. For a moment, there was nothing. Then 3 new lines of text appeared. "Excellent work, Jessica. Your instincts are sharp. The license plate is a critical piece of information. You are doing the right thing. Do not under any circumstances engage directly. Your safety is the priority. Continue to observe and report. You are not alone in this." Reading the words, Jessica felt a strange and powerful wave of validation wash over her fear. She was part of something important. She had an ally, a powerful unseen force that was taking her seriously. She was no longer just a victim in waiting. She was a field agent. The next flight on their schedule was a red-eye to San Francisco. The pattern repeated, but with subtle variations. This time, the coded call mentioned a shipment of delicate orchids and the need to prevent bruising on the petals. Upon landing at SFO, Brenda signaled a different ground crew member, a thin woman with a pinched face. The suitcase was silver this time, but of the same make. The vehicle was a dark blue sedan. Jessica documented it all. Her note-taking now more practiced, her observations sharper. She was learning the language of this secret world, the subtle gestures and the coded phrases. The wine incident, the catalyst for this entire dangerous journey, now seemed like a lifetime ago. It had been an act of petty malice, but it had inadvertently pried open a door to a much darker room. Jessica Evans, the quiet girl from Oregon who just wanted to pay her sister's tuition, was now standing at the threshold of that room holding a light. And she was beginning to understand that she was the only one who could expose the rot hiding within. 3 months before the incident on Flight 815, Elena Vance sat in a cramped, dusty workshop in Brussels that smelled of soldering flux and stale coffee. The room was a chaotic nest of disassembled electronics, stacked servers, and tangled wires. Across a cluttered workbench sat Antoine Dubois, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten battles. Once a senior official in European customs enforcement, Antoine had been unceremoniously pushed into early retirement for getting too close to the nexus of corporate power and organized crime. His official record was tarnished, but his network of whispers and shadows remained perfectly intact. They call themselves the Albatross Network. Antoine set his voice a gravelly rasp. He pushed a lukewarm cup of tea towards Elena, a poetic name for a group of glorified smugglers. They're not moving drugs or weapons. That's too crude, too noisy. They specialize in the untraceable. He slid a tablet across the workbench. On the screen were images of items that had vanished from secure facilities over the past 2 years. A bag of uncut Angolan diamonds, a prototype quantum microchip stolen from a lab in Zurich, a small lost Vermeer painting that had disappeared from a private collection in Geneva. Their method is their genius, Antoine continued. They use the inherent chaos and trust of the commercial airline system. They don't bribe the whole chain, just a few key people in positions of absolute trust. Senior crew members, veteran ground staff security supervisors. People who know the protocols so well, they know exactly how to break them without leaving a trace. And their carrier of choice is Aura Airlines. Elena stated, her eyes scanning the data. It was a pattern she had already begun to suspect. Exclusively, Antoine confirmed. Their first-class service is a perfect cover. The volume of priority luggage, the deference given to the crew, the sheer number of international hubs. It's a smuggler's paradise. But finding the specific players is like trying to identify one particular fish in the entire ocean. They are masters of the mundane. They hide in plain sight. But you have a name, Elena prompted, her gaze steady. Antoine leaned back the springs of his old chair, groaning in protest. A whisper. A ghost. A name that has come up 3 times in connection to 3 different disappearances on 3 different continents. She's a senior flight attendant based out of the United States. A career employee, over 20 years with the company. Spotless record. The perfect ghost. Her name is Brenda Walsh. He looked at Elena, his tired eyes holding a warning. Be careful, my friend. A cornered ghost can be more dangerous than a lion. The scene shifted to the digital ether, the secure channel between Elena and Silas. Here, in this space of pure information, the plan was forged. The legend needs to be impeccable. Elena's voice instructed, clear and concise. I need a cover that justifies my presence in first class on multiple international and domestic routes over a period of several months, and one that encourages observation without inviting suspicion. I'm constructing it now, Silas's synthesized voice replied. Dr. Alani Renee, a cultural sociologist and author with a grant from the Guggenheim Foundation. Your field of study, liminal spaces and the performance of modern luxury. It's academic vague and just pretentious enough to be believable. It explains why you'd be taking copious notes and people watching. I'm building your digital footprint as we speak. A university faculty page mentions in obscure academic journals, a placeholder for your upcoming book on Amazon. Perfect, Elena said. Now for the bait. What followed was the meticulous creation of a masterpiece of deception. The decoy documents were not just random papers. They were a carefully crafted psychological weapon designed to trigger the paranoia of a guilty conscience. Silas generated pages of what appeared to be sensitive data related to a fictional offshore banking scandal, complete with encrypted account numbers, complex flowcharts of money transfers, and redacted names of powerful corporations. It was a narrative of corruption so plausible that anyone involved in illicit activities would immediately see a reflection of their own world in its pages. The paper stock is a custom blend identical to that used for confidential SEC filings, Silas explained as Elena reviewed the digital proofs. The ink has a specific chemical marker. The binding is professional. To anyone who looks these documents will scream, sensitive evidence. While Silas built the trap, Elena prepared the real prize. The intelligence Antoine had provided had given Silas a target, a low-security third-party logistics server that Aura Airlines used for archiving old cargo data. After 3 days of silent digital warfare, Silas had breached it. The data he retrieved was fragmented and heavily encrypted, but it was a start. It showed dozens of flights over 2 years linked to Brenda Walsh's schedule, where high-value, low-weight cargo had been logged with anomalous tracking codes. The data was downloaded onto a single micro SD card, a tiny black speck no bigger than a fingernail. In her hotel suite, Elena performed the final delicate step of the preparation. With the precision of a surgeon, she opened a small seam in the shoulder pad of her charcoal blazer. She slipped the micro SD card inside, nestled between layers of foam and fabric, and then with a needle and a single strand of perfectly matched thread, she stitched the seam closed. The stitch was invisible, the card undetectable to anything but a focused high-frequency metal detector. Her life's work, the culmination of a 3-month investigation, now rested weightlessly on her shoulder. The papers in her hand were the sword and shield. The data in her jacket was the hidden dagger. And so the scene returns to Flight 815, but now seen through the hunter's eyes. As Elena sat in Seat 2A, she was not passively studying her notes. She was actively deploying them. She held the pages in a way that the diagrams and bolded headings were just visible enough to a passing observer. Her focused demeanor was part of the performance the intense academic lost in her vital research. From the moment Brenda Walsh first approached her, Elena knew the bait was in the water. She saw the flicker of calculation in the flight attendant's eyes, the professional smile that didn't quite mask the probing curiosity. Brenda's offer of champagne was a test. Elena's polite refusal and simple request for water was the countermove, a signal that she was not a typical first-class passenger who could be placated with luxury. She was there to work. Through the first hour of the flight, Elena felt Brenda's presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. The flight attendant would pass down the aisle, her movements efficient, but her attention was a focused beam directed at Seat 2A. Elena could feel the woman's mind working, trying to solve the puzzle she presented. The tension was a tightly coiled spring, and Elena waited patiently for it to snap. When Brenda approached with the meal service and the unsolicited glass of red wine, Elena's senses went on high alert. This was it. The move was too aggressive, too out of place. The insistence on the complementary pairing was a flimsy pretext for getting closer, for creating an opportunity. Then came the minor shudder of turbulence, and Elena knew with absolute certainty what was about to happen. She didn't brace herself. She didn't move to protect the papers. She simply observed her mind, a cold, clinical recording device. The arc of the red wine was in its own way beautiful, a perfect, deliberate cascade of dark liquid. The splash, the bloom of the stain, the manufactured gasp from Brenda, it was all theater. And Elena was the sole member of the audience for whom the performance was truly intended. In that moment, as the wine soaked into the decoy documents, a feeling of profound, icy triumph washed over Elena. It was not the anger of a victim. It was the satisfaction of a strategist whose gambit had paid off perfectly. Checkmate. Her internal monologue was swift and precise. Target confirmed hostile. Action, deliberate destruction of perceived evidence. Motive, fear of exposure. Level of paranoia, high. Propensity for reckless action under pressure. Confirmed. Brenda Walsh had just signed her own confession. Not in ink, but in wine. So when Elena slowly lifted her head, the look she gave Brenda was not one of accusation. It was a look of pure, unadulterated knowledge. It was the gaze of a scientist who has just watched a specimen behave exactly as predicted, confirming a hypothesis in the most spectacular fashion. The quiet, cutting words that followed, the turbulence. How unfortunate were not a complaint. They were a pronouncement. As Brenda stammered and fled, Elena calmly assessed the damage. The decoy had served its purpose magnificently. Brenda Walsh had revealed herself not just as a participant in the Albatross network, but as a panicked, volatile, and therefore vulnerable link in the chain. Her petty act of aggression had elevated her from a name on a list to Elena's primary target. Elena gathered the soggy, ruined papers. To everyone else in the cabin, they were the sad remnants of a clumsy accident. To her, they were a trophy. The hunt was no longer a matter of searching for a ghost in the machine. The ghost had foolishly tried to haunt her, and in doing so had revealed its own face. The real work could now begin. In the sterile anonymity of her suite at the Viceroy, Elena Vance's world had shrunk to the dimensions of a single sprawling investigation. The plush carpets were now pathways between data points, and the elegant furniture served as anchor points for a growing web of intrigue. The large whiteboard, once pristine, was now a chaotic mural of corporate malfeasance. Mugshots of Aura Airlines employees downloaded from internal servers were pinned next to flight numbers and airport codes. Lines of red and black marker crisscrossed the board, connecting names to dates and dates to shell corporations, a visual representation of a syndicate hiding in plain sight. Jessica's reports arrived nightly, transmitted through the secure channel Silas had established. They were marvels of precision and quiet courage. Each entry was a small, sharp piece of a much larger mosaic, a hushed conversation overheard in a galley, a suspicious last-minute manifest change, the description of a car waiting in a restricted service area. Jessica, the timid junior flight attendant, had become a first-rate intelligence asset, her fear channeled into a formidable, focused attention to detail. "She's a natural," Silas's synthesized voice remarked during one of their nightly debriefs. Elena was pacing in front of the whiteboard, a phone pressed to her ear. "Her observational data is cleaner than most trained field agents. She's motivated by a sense of justice, Silas. It's a more powerful fuel than money or ideology." Elena replied, her eyes tracing a red line that linked Brenda Walsh to a flight that had landed in Miami 2 days prior. "Let's talk about the license plates." This was their first major breakthrough. The license plates Jessica had diligently recorded in both Miami and San Francisco were not random. Silas, with his effortless ability to traverse the firewalls of the Department of Motor Vehicles, had traced them not to individuals, but to 2 separate opaque shell corporations, Oceanic Logistical Solutions in Florida and Pacific Freight Forwarding in California. "On the surface, they're clean," Silas reported. "They file the minimum required paperwork, pay their taxes through an automated service, and list their corporate addresses at anonymous mail drops." But the incorporation documents for both companies were filed by the same man. A new name appeared on Elena's screen: Albert Finch, a disbarred attorney based in Delaware, a man whose previous legal practice had specialized in making inconvenient problems and people disappear for wealthy clients. "Finch is a ghost now," Silas continued, "but his digital signature is all over the founding of dozens of similar shell corporations. He's a facilitator, a corporate midwife for criminal enterprises. The fact that he set up both these companies is our first concrete link, proving the Miami and San Francisco operations are connected." Elena drew a new heavy black line on the whiteboard, connecting Rico Diaz, the burly baggage handler in Miami, to Maria Flores, the pinched-face woman in San Francisco. Between them, she wrote the name Albert Finch. The web was growing. Her next focus was the code. She had a running list of the bizarre context-free phrases Jessica had painstakingly recorded. O5 Bordeaux, climate control, decanting. Delicate orchids, prevent bruising. A new one had come in last night from a flight to Chicago. Uncut sheet music, handle with care. "They're not just generic codes," Elena mused, speaking her thoughts aloud to Silas. "They're too specific. It's not just package A is a go. This is descriptive. It's a classification system." She began to work on a hypothesis. What if each phrase corresponded to a specific category of contraband? She pulled up the file. Antoine Dubois had given her the list of high-profile items that had vanished over the past 2 years. Silas cross-referenced the date of the Bordeaux flight with any reported thefts of gems or luxury watches in the preceding 72 hours in the New York area. There was a moment of silence filled only with the faint, almost imperceptible sound of Silas's processors working at light speed. "Affirmative," his voice returned. "A private courier carrying a case of Patek Philippe watches was the victim of a high-tech hijacking in Manhattan 2 days before that flight. The watches were valued at $3 million. They were never recovered." Elena felt a cold thrill. The delicate orchids. A crate of experimental processing chips disappeared from a secure transport facility outside Boston the day before the SFO flight. They're fragile, susceptible to static discharge. You could say they bruise easily. And the uncut sheet music. A portfolio of bearer bonds, unregistered, untraceable financial instruments, essentially blank checks, was stolen from a law firm in downtown Manhattan last week. A stack of paper that sings a song of wealth. The code was broken. It was a simple but effective system to inform the ground team of the nature and value of the cargo they were to intercept, allowing them to prepare for its subsequent handover. Brenda wasn't just a mule. She was the quartermaster, the dispatcher relaying critical information down the line. The identities of the ground crew were the next pieces to fall into place. Silas delved into the digital lives of Rico Diaz and Maria Flores. On their declared salaries as airline employees, they should have been living modest working-class lives. Instead, their financial records, which Silas accessed with casual disregard for privacy laws, told a different story. Rico Diaz owned a boat and a condo on South Beach. Maria Flores had made 3 significant all-cash real estate investments in the past year. And here's where it gets interesting. Silas said a hint of what might have been excitement in his synthesized voice. They are both paid a monthly logistical consulting fee from a third shell corporation, Aeronautic Ventures LLC. Also registered by Finch. Elena asked. Negative. This one is different. Much cleaner, much more sophisticated. Buried under 3 layers of offshore registrations. But I found a thread. A new document appeared on Elena's screen. It was a single, heavily encrypted wire transfer from Aeronautic Ventures to a private wealth management account. It took me 12 hours to decrypt the transaction header. The authorization code for the transfer originated from a secure terminal inside Aura Airlines' Regional Cargo Management Office at JFK. Elena stopped pacing. This was it. The quantum leap. The investigation was no longer confined to the blue-collar world of flight attendants and baggage handlers. Can you trace the specific terminal? She asked, her voice low. I can do better, Silas replied. The biometric login for that terminal at the exact time of the transfer belongs to one Martin Cutler, age 52. Regional Director of Cargo Logistics for the entire Northeast Corridor. Elena walked to the whiteboard and wrote the name Martin Cutler in large block letters at the very top. She circled it twice. The entire complexion of the investigation had just changed. Martin Cutler was not a ghost like Brenda or a foot soldier like Rico. He was a man with institutional power. He could sign off on manifests, alter shipping routes, delete security footage, and most importantly, provide top-down protection for the entire network. His involvement explained the operation's longevity and its success. It explained why Brenda Walsh acted with such supreme, untouchable confidence. Her queen was protected by a king. This revelation also meant the danger had increased tenfold. Confronting Brenda was one thing. Taking on a corporate director with deep connections and the power to bury them was another. Any official report, any tip to federal authorities would be intercepted and neutralized by Cutler before it ever reached a sympathetic ear. He was the firewall. Elena stood back and looked at the board, at the sprawling, ugly map of corruption she had pieced together. It had all started with one woman's petty cruelty, a single malicious act born of prejudice and insecurity. That one tug on a loose thread had led her here to a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy that reached into the management suite of a Fortune 500 company. The wine stain on her decoy documents was a symbol of Brenda's personal ugliness, but the network on this board represented a systemic corporate disease. Brenda was just the most visible symptom. Helena finally understood the full scope of what she was up against. They couldn't go to the airline. They couldn't yet go to the authorities. The evidence they had was strong but circumstantial. A prosecutor would see a series of coincidences. A defense attorney would tear it apart. They needed more. They needed irrefutable proof. They needed to catch the network in the act to get a visual record of a handover to find the contraband itself. She picked up the secure phone again. Silas, she said, her voice firm, resolute. We have the map. We know who the predators are. She paused, her eyes fixed on Martin Cutler's name at the top of the board. We're done with surveillance. It's time to set a trap and force one of them out into the open. The path to justice, Elena Vance knew, was not paved with righteous indignation alone. It was built block by painstaking block with strategy, patience, and the cold, hard currency of undeniable proof. The web of corruption she and Silas had mapped was intricate and damning, but it was still a web of shadows, digital ghosts, shell corporations, and circumstantial links. To bring down a man like Martin Cutler and the syndicate he managed, she needed to drag the conspiracy out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light. She needed to bait the trap. Her first call was to Antoine Dubois in Brussels. The secure line crackled with transatlantic distance, but the old spymaster's voice was clear. You have mapped the nest, Antoine stated, having already reviewed the summary Elena had sent. Now you wish to capture the queen bee, but you find she is guarded by a dragon. Aptly put, Elena replied, her eyes on the name Martin Cutler, circled at the top of her whiteboard. The dragon won't fall for whispers or threats. I need to give him something he can't resist, a prize so valuable it will force his network to move in a predictable, observable way. A honeypot. Antoine rasped, a hint of old excitement in his voice. What flavor do you require? Technology, Elena said without hesitation. Small, high value, and plausible for air transport. Something that would justify the risk for them. I have just the thing, Antoine said after a moment's thought. A Swiss tech firm I have a relationship with. They have just developed a new series of neural interface processors. The prototypes are no bigger than a thumbnail and are worth a fortune on the black market for industrial espionage. A crate of them would be a king's ransom. I will arrange for a shipment of perfect inert replicas to be created. The packaging, the security seals, the thermal casing, it will all be flawless. The plan began to crystallize. The bait would be manufactured in Switzerland and shipped via a high-security courier to a fictional tech startup in San Diego. The final crucial leg of its journey would be a commercial flight, Aura Airlines 622, a red-eye from JFK to San. The manifest will be a work of art, Antoine promised. Flagged at every level, extremely high value. Sensitive experimental electronics, subject to on-site security transfer. It will be a flashing beacon of temptation to anyone monitoring high-value cargo flows. While Antoine procured the physical bait, Silas prepared the digital lure. A direct tip would be too obvious, too clean. Instead, Silas orchestrated a masterful digital whisper campaign. He began by planting subtle search inquiries and data requests within low-level logistics networks he knew Cutler's operation used for reconnaissance. He then created a false digital correspondence, a carefully fabricated email chain between two ghost executives at the Swiss firm, discussing the unfortunate necessity of using a commercial carrier for the final leg of the shipment due to a last-minute private courier cancellation. He allowed this chain to be leaked onto a server that had a known security vulnerability he was certain the Albatross network exploited. The trap was not being presented, it was being discovered. Cutler and his people would believe they had cleverly intercepted intelligence about a golden opportunity. Their greed, Elena knew, would make them blind to the possibility of artifice. With the bait in motion, the most delicate part of the operation began preparing Jessica. Elena arranged a meeting, not in person this time, but a dead drop and a subsequent secure call. She left a prepaid burner phone for Jessica in a locker at a 24-hour gym in Denver, with instructions to call at a specific time from a location with no security cameras. When the call connected, Elena could hear the anxiety in the younger woman's breathing. I've been sending the reports, Jessica said, her voice a nervous rush. Brenda is... she's more on edge than ever since that flight. She watches me constantly. You've been doing exceptional work, Jessica. You're the reason we are now able to move to the final phase. Elena said, her voice calm and reassuring. She then laid out the plan, omitting no detail, respecting Jessica enough to give her the full, unvarnished truth of the risks involved. In 3 days, a high-value piece of cargo will be transported on Aura Flight 622 from New York to San Diego, Elena explained. Brenda Walsh will be the senior flight attendant on that flight. We have arranged for you to be on that crew as well. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Arranged how? My associate is very good at navigating scheduling systems, Elena said simply. Your assignment will appear routine. Brenda will suspect nothing. The cargo will be a silver hard-shell Pelican case. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to place a small device on that case at some point during the flight. She described the device, a magnetic tracker no bigger than a coat button that was also equipped with a pinhole camera and a microphone. Place it on the case. Jessica's voice was thin with fear. Elena, I'm a flight attendant, not a spy. What if she sees me? What if I get caught? You will not get caught because we will create the perfect opportunity, Elena said, her tone firm but still gentle. And I will be on that flight with you in the first-class cabin. You will not be alone. A team will also be on the ground at both airports monitoring everything. Your only task is a single simple action that will take less than 5 seconds. But it is the most critical 5 seconds of this entire investigation. Elena let the silence stretch, giving Jessica space to process the enormity of the request. She was asking the young woman to move from passive observation to active participation in a dangerous criminal sting. Why me? Jessica finally whispered. Because you have something that Brenda and her entire network have lost. Elena replied. Courage. And a conscience. This is your chance to make sure that people like her can never intimidate a good person like you again. But the choice is yours, Jessica. There is no shame in walking away now. Another long pause. Jessica thought of her sister, of her student loans, of the life she was so terrified of losing. But then she thought of Brenda's sneering face, of the corporate wall of indifference, of the quiet, steely resolve of the woman on the other end of this call. She thought of the kind of world she wanted to live in. Tell me where the case will be, Jessica said, her voice no longer trembling but filled with a newfound fragile resolve. The day of the flight arrived shrouded in the gray, misty humidity of a New York morning. The stage was set. The bait, the silver Pelican case containing nothing but perfectly weighted blocks of inert polymer, had arrived at JFK and was processed through the high-security cargo facility, its every move triggering digital alerts that Silas was now mirroring for Elena's team. Silas had, as promised, manipulated the crew roster. A senior flight attendant had a sudden family emergency, and Jessica, being next on the reserve list and already certified for the aircraft, was slotted in. It was a seamless, utterly believable substitution. Elena arrived at the airport under her guise as Dr. Alani Renee. She moved through the first-class check-in with the bored, distracted air of a frequent traveler. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her senses on high alert, observing every security guard, every gate agent for any sign of compromise. As she settled into her seat 3B this time, close enough to observe but not so close as to be obvious, she watched the crew come aboard. Jessica entered first, her face pale but her movements professional. She went about her duties, her eyes carefully avoiding Elena's. Then Brenda Walsh swept in her presence, immediately commanding the space. She scanned the passenger list on her tablet, her lips thinning with annoyance when she saw Jessica's name. A minor inconvenience, a less experienced attendant to manage, but nothing to raise a real alarm. Just before the cabin door was sealed, Jessica's burner phone vibrated in her apron pocket. It was a text message pre-scheduled by Silas to arrive at the last possible moment. The package is Pelican 1510. It will be in the forward first-class coat closet. Your window is during the main meal service. I will create a distraction in the galley. Good luck. Elena powered down her own phone and looked up as Brenda began the welcome announcement, her voice a smooth, confident melody of corporate hospitality. Their eyes met for a fleeting, inconsequential second across the cabin. In Brenda's eyes there was no recognition, just the dismissive glance she gave to all her passengers. But for Elena, the moment was electric. The trap was sprung. The bait was on board, the inside agent was in position, and the target was completely unaware she was flying towards her own destruction. The players were on the board. The game was in motion, and somewhere in the intricate dance of logistics and lies, a predator was about to step onto a stage from which there was no exit. The cabin of Aura Flight 622 was a darkened theater of manufactured night. At 36,000 feet, somewhere over the vast sleeping expanse of the American Midwest, the only light came from the blue glow of seatback screens and the thin, sterile beams of reading lights cutting through the gloom. For the 100 or so passengers cocooned in a state of restless slumber or cinematic distraction, it was a routine red-eye flight. For the 3 women at the heart of the unfolding drama, it was a battlefield where a single misstep could lead to catastrophe. Jessica Evans felt as though her entire body had been replaced by a live wire of pure adrenaline. Every quiet chime of a call button, every rustle of a passenger shifting in their seat sent a jolt of panic through her. She performed her duties on autopilot, her hands moving with a mechanical memory her conscious mind could no longer access. Her smile felt like a plaster mask, threatening to crack. Her entire being was focused on 2 things: the innocuous-looking coat closet at the front of the first-class cabin and the menacing, watchful presence of Brenda Walsh. Brenda was a predator in her element. The dim lighting seemed to sharpen her features, her eyes sweeping the cabin with a restless, proprietary vigilance. The paranoia that had taken root after her encounter with Elena had now blossomed into a full-blown obsession with control. She noticed everything. She noticed the slight tremor in Jessica's hand as she poured a glass of water. She noticed the way Jessica's gaze kept flicking almost involuntarily toward the forward closet. And she noticed that Jessica, who normally kept to the economy cabin as much as possible, was lingering in the galley, her energy a thrumming, nervous distraction. Elena, from her seat in 3B, was a portrait of academic detachment. A book lay open on her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was observing the entire tableau in the reflection of her darkened seatback screen. She saw Jessica's barely concealed terror and Brenda's mounting suspicion. The atmosphere was becoming unstable. The carefully planned timeline for the operation was in danger of collapsing before the window of opportunity even opened. The main meal service began a muted ritual in the darkened cabin. This was the moment. As the other flight attendants moved down the aisles with their carts, Elena knew she had to act. She pressed the call button. A junior attendant, a young man named Paul, appeared instantly. "Yes, ma'am. I need to speak with the purser," Elena said, her voice carrying a note of polite but firm insistence. "Is there something I can help you with?" Paul offered. "No, thank you. My issue requires the senior flight attendant," Elena insisted. Paul retreated, and a moment later, Brenda appeared, her face a mask of weary professionalism. "How can I assist you?" she asked, her tone making it clear that the assistance would be rendered grudgingly. Elena looked up at her, her expression one of thoughtful concern. "I'm afraid there's been a small mistake. The in-flight menu lists the Chateau Montelena Chardonnay, a wine I know quite well. The wine you're serving," she gestured to the glass on a nearby passenger's tray, "is a Kendall Jackson. A fine wine to be sure, but not what was advertised. For a first-class ticket, one expects a certain level of accuracy in the details, wouldn't you agree?" The complaint was so specific, so absurdly trivial, that it had the desired effect. It was the precise kind of grievance an entitled, pedantic passenger would make. It threw Brenda completely off balance, forcing her into the familiar, tedious script of placating a difficult customer. "I am very sorry to hear that, ma'am. Let me check the galley inventory immediately," Brenda said through gritted teeth, her attention now fully consumed by this ridiculous time-wasting problem. This was Jessica's cue. The distraction had begun. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Jessica grabbed a fresh pillow and a sealed blanket from the galley, a perfect pretext for accessing the storage closet. She walked the few steps to the closet door, her movements feeling slow and syrupy, as if moving through water. Her mind was screaming. "She's watching. She's right there. She'll see." She forced her fumbling hands to open the latch. The closet was dark inside. And there it was. The silver Pelican case model 1510, exactly as Elena had described, tucked neatly behind a row of hanging suit bags. In her other hand, hidden in the folds of the blanket, was the small button-sized device. Her fingers felt numb, clumsy. The device was magnetic, Elena had said. It would take less than a second. She reached into the closet, her arm brushing against a hanging coat. She fumbled with the device. For a horrifying moment, she thought she was going to drop it. Its smooth plastic surface felt slick against her sweaty fingertips. She finally oriented it correctly and moved it toward the case's metal-reinforced handle. The click of the magnet seating itself sounded to Jessica's terrified ears as loud as a gunshot in the silent cabin. She snatched the blanket, slammed the closet door shut, and spun around, her face flushed, her breathing ragged, and found herself staring directly into the cold, furious eyes of Brenda Walsh. Elena's distraction had not been enough. Brenda, a master of multitasking, her contempt had been conducting her conversation about wine while keeping one eye fixed on the galley. She had seen Jessica's nervous approach to the closet, her overly long stay inside. All her simmering suspicion had just boiled over. "What were you doing in that closet?" Brenda's voice was a low, venomous hiss, meant only for Jessica. I was just getting a blanket for the passenger in 4C, Jessica stammered, holding up the blanket as evidence. Brenda's eyes were like ice chips. "You were in there for 10 seconds. It doesn't take that long to get a blanket. What were you really doing?" She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, her body radiating a palpable menace. She grabbed Jessica's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. "I've been watching you all night. You're nervous. You're clumsy. You keep looking around like a scared rabbit. What are you up to?" "Nothing, I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't lie to me," Brenda hissed, her face inches from Jessica's. "That woman from the other day, the one with the wine. You've spoken to her, haven't you? What did she offer you? Who are you working for?" From her seat, Elena saw the confrontation escalate. She saw Brenda's hand clamp down on Jessica's arm. The time for subtlety was over. Her asset was compromised. Without a moment's hesitation, Elena stood up. She didn't rush. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace that was far more intimidating than any sudden movement. She glided the few feet to the galley entrance, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the confrontation. "Let her go," Elena said. Her voice was the same quiet, lethal instrument Brenda remembered from their first encounter. Brenda spun around her face, a mask of shock and rage at seeing her two problems, her two sources of paranoia, suddenly standing together. In her panicked mind, the pieces clicked together into a terrifying, distorted picture. "You!" She spat, her eyes wide with a crazed realization. "You're with her. This is a setup. You've been planning this." She was a cornered animal, and she reacted as one. She shoved Jessica aside, sending her stumbling against the drink cart, and lunged not at Elena, but at the closet door. Her objective was clear. Get to the Pelican case, the precious cargo, and protect it at all costs. But she never made it. Elena moved with a speed and efficiency that seemed to defy the laws of physics within the confined space. As Brenda lunged, Elena pivoted on the ball of her foot. She didn't block the lunge, she redirected it. Her right hand shot out, not in a fist, but with fingers extended, striking a precise point on Brenda's shoulder, a pressure point that sent a jolt of paralyzing fire down the older woman's arm. Brenda's lunge faltered, her body seizing for a split second. It was all the time Elena needed. In the next fluid motion, she stepped behind Brenda, her left arm snaking around her throat in a perfectly applied sleeper hold, while her right hand secured Brenda's flailing arm. She pulled Brenda back against the galley counter, a swift, silent takedown that was brutal in its quiet efficiency. There was no shouting, no messy struggle. One moment Brenda was a snarling threat. The next she was neutralized, pinned and gasping for air. The few passengers who were awake stared mouths agape at the surreal scene. The quiet, bookish academic in 3B had just subdued a flight attendant with the clinical precision of a special forces soldier. Elena held Brenda, pinned her lips close to the woman's ear. "The game is over, Brenda," she whispered, her voice a blade of ice. Brenda sagged, the fight draining out of her. Defeat, absolute and undeniable, flooded her system. Elena released her hold just enough for Brenda to breathe, but not enough for her to move. Keeping one hand firmly on Brenda's shoulder, Elena reached for the crew phone. Her academic cover was not just blown, it was annihilated. Jessica stared, a mixture of terror and awe on her face. Elena dialed a number from memory. It was not the captain. It was not airline security. "Silas," she said into the receiver, her voice calm and completely in command. "The package is tagged. The asset is compromised but secure. Alert the ground team. Phase 3 is a go, effective immediately." She hung up the phone and looked at the stunned faces of the crew and passengers who had witnessed the event. The quiet flight to San Diego had just become the final explosive act in a long and silent war. And everyone in the cabin now knew that Dr. Alani Renee was not who she claimed to be. For the final 58 minutes of Aura Flight 622, the first-class cabin existed in a state of suspended animation. The chaos of Brenda's takedown had subsided into a thick, humming tension that was more unnerving than the brief explosion of violence. Brenda herself sat rigidly in a rear jump seat, her face a pale, bloodless mask of disbelief, a male flight attendant standing quietly but firmly nearby. Her reign, which had lasted 20 years, had ended in 20 seconds. The captain, a veteran pilot named Miller, with steady eyes and a demeanor of unflappable calm, had emerged from the cockpit to find a scene from a spy thriller playing out in his galley. Elena, without revealing her name or affiliation, had met his concerned gaze with an authority that transcended any airline hierarchy. She had presented him with a digital credential on her phone, a simple star-spangled shield, and a Department of Justice authorization code that Silas had generated for just such a contingency. "Captain Miller," she had said, her voice low and absolute. "This aircraft is the current site of a federal law enforcement operation. Your purser has been identified as a person of interest. Your only duty is to land this plane safely and on schedule at SFO. You will maintain radio silence regarding this incident. Upon landing, you will await instructions from ground control. Do you understand?" Miller, a man who had dealt with everything from engine failures to medical emergencies, recognized the cold, unmistakable ring of government authority. He had simply nodded, his face grim, and retreated to the cockpit, sealing the door behind him. The chain of command had been superseded. Eleanor returned to her seat. Her book lay on the floor where it had fallen, a forgotten prop from a role she no longer needed to play. She calmly picked it up and placed it in her bag. The few passengers who had been awake and witnessed the event stared at her with a mixture of fear and awe. She was no longer the difficult academic from 3B. She was an unknown and formidable power, and no one dared to meet her gaze for more than a second. While the plane glided through the dark, Phase 3 was unfolding on the ground with silent digital precision. In a secure command center, Silas monitored a dozen streams of data. He had already transmitted the full unredacted evidence package, Jessica's logs, the Albatross network's financial data, and Antoine's initial intelligence to a dedicated FBI server. A live feed from the microcamera on the Pelican case showed a dark, vibrating view of the coat closet's interior, its audio picking up the muffled drone of the engines. Its GPS signal was a steady pulsing dot. At San Francisco International Airport, a very different kind of welcome party was assembling. Lead Special Agent Marcus Thorne, no relation to the CEO from the story's first draft, but a man of similar unyielding resolve, coordinated his teams. Plainclothes agents from the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Unit melted into the crowd of waiting families and limo drivers at the arrivals gate. A tactical team in concert with airport police established a discreet cordon around gate C-12. On the tarmac, another team monitored the cargo bay, their eyes on one woman, Maria Flores, the ground crew accomplice who was going about her duties, completely oblivious that her every move was being watched. She was expecting a routine, profitable night. She was about to have the worst night of her life. The plane touched down at SFO with the gentle bump of a perfectly executed landing. The familiar, cheerful announcement from the cockpit was replaced by Captain Miller's terse, serious voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Due to a security protocol on the ground, we ask that you please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has been cleared by airport officials. Thank you for your cooperation." A murmur of confusion and anxiety swept through the cabin. Brenda Walsh in her jump seat began to tremble. Her delusion of this being a simple personal conflict had shattered. The reality of what was happening was dawning with terrifying clarity. The jet bridge connected with a solid, final-sounding thud. The cabin door hissed open. Two men in dark suits, their lapels bearing the unmistakable glint of FBI pins, stepped aboard. They moved with an unhurried, intimidating purpose. The first agent held up a badge and a warrant to the flight attendant who met them at the door. "We're here for Brenda Walsh," he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. He walked down the aisle, his eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on the pale, trembling woman in the jump seat. "Brenda Walsh," he stated, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to transport stolen goods and smuggling. You have the right to remain silent." As the agent cuffed her hands behind her back, the metallic ratchet click seemed to echo through the silent cabin. The public, humiliating spectacle she had sought to inflict upon Elena was now being visited upon her, magnified 1,000 times over. Her carefully constructed world of authority and illicit power crumbled into dust under the cold, indifferent gaze of federal law. Simultaneously on the tarmac below, the cargo bay doors opened. Maria Flores moved into position, her eyes already searching for the telltale silver case. As the baggage was offloaded, she spotted it. Following the familiar protocol, she intercepted it before it reached the main carousel. As her fingers closed around the handle, a calm voice spoke from directly behind her. "Federal agents, don't move." Maria spun around to find herself surrounded by 4 agents. The silver Pelican case was gently taken from her hand. The tiny button-sized device that Jessica had planted on its handle had performed its function perfectly, acting as a final, irrefutable beacon, guiding the authorities to the exact time and place of the crime. Elena deplaned last. Agent Thorne was waiting for her on the jet bridge, away from the prying eyes of the passengers. "Sparrow," he said, addressing her by a code name that confirmed their established professional relationship. "Your intel was flawless. The tracker led us right to Flores, and the audio it picked up of her confirming the orchid shipment with her contact on the ground is a prosecutor's dream." And Walsh, Elena asked, her face betraying no emotion. "She's in custody, shaken. It won't be long before she starts talking, trying to save herself." He gave a grim smile. "You did good work here. We've been trying to get a foothold inside this network for over a year." "They became arrogant," Elena replied. "It makes people careless." Jessica was the next person to emerge, looking pale and overwhelmed. A female agent approached her gently. "Ms. Evans, I'm Agent Cardenas. We'd like you to come with us. You are not under arrest. You are a cooperating witness, and we have a legal team ready to ensure you are fully protected." Elena caught Jessica's eye and gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. "You did the right thing. You will be safe." A wave of relief washed over Jessica's face as she was led away not as a criminal, but as a protected asset. By now the news was breaking. The sight of a cuffed flight attendant being led through a major airport terminal was impossible to suppress. Local news crews were scrambling their helicopters already circling overhead. The official story from the FBI was terse. A multi-agency operation had resulted in several arrests at SFO, in connection with an ongoing smuggling investigation. But the unofficial story, told in 100 different cell phone videos and excited whispers from the deplaning passengers, was far more dramatic. The airline's corporate headquarters was in meltdown. The PR department was besieged. The stock and after-hours trading began to plummet. In a quiet, secure debriefing room deep within the airport, Elena stood with Agent Thorne watching the chaos unfold on a news monitor. "It's moving faster than we anticipated," Thorne noted, sipping a cup of vending machine coffee. "Brenda Walsh has already requested a lawyer and is offering a deal. She'll give up her ground crew first," Elena predicted. "Rico in Miami, the others. She'll sacrifice the pawns to protect herself." "She already has," Thorne said, looking down at a message on his phone. "But she also gave us something bigger. Panicked people make mistakes. She's trying to pin the whole operation on her direct supervisor. Says she was coerced." Elena's expression remained unchanged. She knew who Brenda was talking about. She had been waiting for this name to surface. The first name she gave them, the man she says ran everything out of New York. Thorne continued, looking up at Elena. Elena spoke the name, her voice a quiet final judgment. "Martin Cutler." Agent Thorne nodded grimly. "A federal team is on its way to his home in Connecticut as we speak." The unraveling had begun. The thread Elena had pulled on Flight 815 was now bringing down the entire rotten tapestry. She walked to the window, looking out not at the news cameras, but at the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles still clustered on the tarmac. Brenda Walsh had been apprehended. Maria Flores was in custody. Martin Cutler was about to be. The limbs of the Albatross network were being systematically severed. But the head and the corporate culture of greed and willful blindness that had allowed it to thrive were still intact. Her work here was done. But the real battle, the one that would be fought not with trackers and takedowns, but with words and exposure, was about to begin. The story was ready to be written. 6 months after the coordinated arrests at SFO, the world knew the name of the Albatross network. They knew it from the screaming headlines, the talking heads on cable news, and the precipitous collapse of Aura Airlines' stock price. But they did not yet know the full story. They had seen the wreckage, but they did not understand the architecture of the rot that had brought the Titan down. That understanding was about to be delivered. In a quiet, obsessively fact-checked corner of the New York headquarters for Global Inquiry magazine, Elena Vance performed her final review. Spread across a large, light-filled desk were the proofs of her 60-page exposé. For half a year she had lived and breathed this story, weaving together the disparate threads of Jessica's secret logs, Silas's digital intercepts, Antoine's intelligence, and the full detailed confessions of the apprehended smugglers. The result was not just an article, it was a corporate autopsy. The piece, titled simply, "Unsecure Greed Corruption," and the Fall of Aura Airlines, went live on a Tuesday morning. Its impact was not a ripple, it was a tsunami. Elena's writing was a masterpiece of controlled fury. She began not with the crime, but with the culture. She opened with an unflinching portrait of Brenda Walsh, not as a monstrous villain, but as a product of a system that rewarded seniority over integrity and fostered a culture of petty tyranny in its senior staff. She described how this culture created the perfect blind spots for a man like Martin Cutler to operate his criminal enterprise with impunity. The article laid out the smuggling operation in devastating detail, complete with shipping manifests, encrypted communications, and a flowchart that traced the flow of illicit money from the shell corporations back to the offshore accounts of 2 of the airline's executive vice presidents. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. The story was not just about crime. It was a damning indictment of a corporate ethos that saw its own employees and safety protocols as inconvenient obstacles to profit. Within 48 hours, the interim CEO of Aura Airlines resigned, along with 3 remaining board members who were named in the article as having ignored previous internal warnings about Cutler's department. Federal regulators, armed with the roadmap Elena had provided, broadened their investigation from simple smuggling to a full-scale racketeering probe into the airline's highest echelons. facing a life sentence. Martin Cutler gave up everything and everyone. His confession, a cascade of names and dates that implicated the very heart of the company's leadership. Brenda Walsh, no longer a queen, but a terrified pawn, received a 7-year sentence, her cooperation earning her a modicum of mercy she had never shown anyone else. Her accomplices on the ground received similar sentences. The Albatross network was not just broken, it was annihilated, its members scattered, and its methods laid bare for the world to see. But Elena's story was not solely about the fall of the guilty. Its final, most powerful section was dedicated to the rise of the virtuous. She told the story of Jessica Evans. 2 months after the arrests, Jessica found herself not in a courtroom, but in a corporate boardroom. The new court-appointed oversight committee for the restructured Aura Airlines had summoned her. She walked in not as a nervous employee, but as a guest of honor. The new CEO, a stern but fair woman named Patricia Hale, who had been brought in to clean house, stood to greet her. Ms. Evans Hale began, her voice resonating through the silent room. This company owes you a debt it can never truly repay. You faced down a corrupt system and chose integrity, when silence would have been infinitely easier. That is a quality we have for too long failed to value. She then made an offer that stunned the entire industry. We are forming a new fully independent workforce integrity and safety committee. It will have unprecedented power to audit any department, investigate any employee complaint without fear of managerial reprisal, and recommend policy changes directly to this board. We would like you to be its first co-chair. In that moment, Jessica's transformation was complete. The fear that had haunted her for months was replaced by a profound sense of purpose. She accepted not with glee, but with the sober gravity of someone who understood the weight of the responsibility. Her first act as co-chair was to institute a whistleblower protection program so robust that it became the new gold standard for the industry. She was no longer a victim of the system. She had become its immune response. The world is not changed by grand sweeping gestures, but by the accumulated weight of small, courageous choices. The story of Aura Flight 815 was not in the end about a spectacular criminal takedown. It was about the contrast between two such choices. Brenda Walsh chose malice, a small, petty act of cruelty that was the final arrogant misstep of a corrupt soul. Jessica Evans chose integrity, a terrifying, quiet act of defiance that required risking everything she had. One choice led to ruin, the other to revolution. This is the enduring lesson that the systems of power, no matter how vast and intimidating, are ultimately composed of individuals. And when individuals of conscience refuse to be silent, the walls of the most formidable fortresses can and do come tumbling down. True justice is not merely the punishment of the wicked. It is the empowerment of the good to rebuild the world on a foundation of truth. Elena Vance did not attend any of the press conferences or accept any of the journalism awards her article subsequently won. Her victory was not in the accolades, but in the outcome. Her final scene in this story takes place months later. She is sitting in a quiet, sunlit coffee shop in a city far from New York, working on the preliminary research for a new investigation. On her laptop, a small window is open, playing a live stream from an Aura Airlines training facility in Denver. On the screen is Jessica Evans. She is standing before a class of new flight attendant recruits. She is no longer the timid, uncertain girl from Flight 815. Her posture is confident, her voice clear and steady, her eyes filled with a wisdom that has been earned at great cost. Your uniform gives you authority. Jessica is telling the recruits, but your character gives you legitimacy. Your first duty is not to the schedule or the bottom line, or even to your superiors. Your first duty is to your conscience. Never ever let anyone make you feel small for choosing to do the right thing. Elena watches for a long moment, a rare, genuine smile touching her lips. She sees in Jessica's confident stance the full and true meaning of her victory. She had not just exposed a crime, she had helped forge a leader. She closes the laptop. The story of the Albatross network is over. Her part in it is done. She takes a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze already sweeping across the other patrons in the cafe, her mind already searching for the next quiet injustice, the next story waiting to be told. For the hunter, the dawn is just a brief moment of rest before the next hunt begins. If this story of courage and accountability resonated with you, thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like these are more than just entertainment. They are reminders that even in a world that can often feel overwhelming, the integrity of a single individual can be a powerful and transformative force for change. They prove that no one is too small to make a difference, and no system is too powerful to be challenged by the simple, unwavering truth. We are deeply grateful for your time and attention. If you believe in the power of such stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these narratives of justice, resilience, and the human spirit to light. Thank you for watching.